Alright, the recording should be on. I should be recording now. Welcome guys. Thank you for being here. Sorry I couldn't be in class today. Had a family emergency coming up, and so I had to go with the recorded route. I mean, recording makes it a little bit more comfortable for me, but I wish I could be there in person. But at least I have my roommate's computer, which has the webcam and the headset. Um, so that's a little bit more engaging for you guys. Um, there might be some technical difficulties throughout the way, so sorry about that. Just bear with me. So my topic: city lament in Augustan epic, anti-types of Rome from Troy to Alba. So we'll get into the chapters, the chapter meaning and the title meaning in a little bit. We're gonna pick some words out. Um, Meanwhile, enjoy this picture of the ruins of Troy. I mean the ruins of Rome. Sorry. So the chapter summary, the author Keith connects Virgil's Aeneid, which we read before in class, Ovid's Metamorphosis, which is a poem, and Aeneas's Annales, which is also a poem. I don't know how do you say the last name Aeneas and Annales, so that's how I say him. Um, so the the author looks at the falls of Troy and the fall of Alba Longa being another city. As foreshadowings of Rome's rise, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that because a little bit later. Uh, and Rome and Troy are connected through history and genes. Trojan DNA paved the way for a successful Roman rise, basically. That to further detail later, but um, may not know that Romans are the descendants of Latins, and then Latins are the descendants of Trojans who were moving towards Italy after Troy fell. Oh, by the way, if you hear anything, it's my roommates. Sorry about that. Um, the authors of these, two poems and one epic. So Ovid Metamorphosis has its own depiction of the fall of Troy. His is a poem which is basically a history from the beginning of time, where like everyone can beginning of the world basically, up until the point of the death of Julius Caesar. And these are Augustan literature periods because the current emperor is Augustine, and I'm pretty sure he's the son of Julius Caesar or adopted son. I'm not quite sure. Um, and so Ovid's Metamorphosis goes from the beginning of the world all the way up to Julius Caesar's death. Virgil, Aeneid, we discussed this in class. Has his own predictions of the fall of Troy. Um, and we know like the story of Aeneas, how he traveled. But it also has lots of points about lament and the embodiment of lament, the Trojan women, the sorrow, the grief, and we'll get to those a little bit later. And Enos and the Annales, so that depicts the fall of Alba Longa, and also a little bit of Troy. Alba Longa being another city that connects also to the Aeneid, um, and then a little bit about Enos is that he's supposedly, Homer reincarnated. He had a dream where Homer came up to him and told him that he is now Homer, like Enos is Homer reincarnated. And so, I mean, the one thing you can tell about all these three authors is that they were very infatuated by Homer, very motivated by him, and wanted to like follow in his footsteps. And the top picture is a picture I found supposedly of the Metamorphosis, where this woman has like arms of trees. Pretty interesting because the title Metamorphosis kind of you're morphing into something, you're changing. Um, but I'm trying to find the meaning to that, so maybe you guys can discuss a little bit about that later. Um, and also the bottom picture is the Trojan horse being pulled. At least that's what I depicted as. It's this was something I found during the while I was fall of Eden the fall of Troy in the Aeneid, and so that's what I depicted as. So connections of Troy and Rome. Since these authors were very infatuated with Homer, they take his characters, or they could be real life people, who knows. Um, and Virgil in the Aeneid takes Aeneas, and makes him the main character now in his book, in his epic. So a little bit of history about Alba Longa. It's in the Aeneid, at Aeneas is traveling, and so Alba Longa is basically the city where Aeneas lands in Italy, and he is welcomed by the king Latinus, king of the early Latins, as he was called. Um, and eventually, life goes on. King Latinus dies, and then Aeneas becomes king, and then Aeneas dies, and so Aeneas' son build, builds Alba Longa as the capital in the Alba Mountains. And so the fall of Alba Longa is because they were at war with Rome, the Roman monarchy. I'm not sure yet, quite sure. But basically, yeah, the city fell, and so it connects Troy and Rome in that way. The Aeneid and the Annales. Um, they have two characters from both uh, epic and poem, and they put them together. And so, like I said before, Virgil takes Aeneas and gives him a whole story, tying together Rome and Troy, Italy, and their, journey from Trojans to Romans, and that whole um, ancestral line. And then Ovid and Enos give a more historical view instead of just like a Enos like story. It's more like a historian's view of what's been going on, and so they recollect their events in their own ways without really divulging into many stuff, like lament, sorrow, the Trojan women. And so two things that were interesting when I was reading this chapter is that um, Enos and Virgil both have very similar ways that they started their writing about the sack of Troy and the fall of Alba Longa. Um, no, there's two different authors, two different cities, two different areas, two different time periods. Um, Not time periods, but there's a gap between them. And so, it's interesting how they have so many similarities. It gets you to wonder if it's like, copying, if there's any sort of influence there. So the chapter symbolization. Um, we'll get into the contrasting male warfare and female lament later. First, I want to highlight antitypes. It was actually the first time I heard that word, so I was very curious. It means opposites, but also something that being represented by a symbol. So opposites with symbolism. So Rome is being represented by Troy. Troy is the symbol of a fall of a city, and so being the antitype means the opposite. It will be Rome, which will be the rise of the city. I don't know if you guys can see my hands. Will be the rise of the city. So Troy will fall, Rome will rise, and that's what the author, was implying. And I get something else out of that, which I go into later. Um, but that's what that antitype means. As an example. Um, you know, the fall of one city, the rise of another, with opposites, but with some symbolism in there. And something else, chapter symbolism. The Trojan survivors, the people who fled, the women who grieved, who suffered, who mourned the death of their children, their sons, their soldiers, their husbands. Um, and it divulges a little bit deeper into this, this tradition of lament, where these Trojan women, have to kiss their homeland goodbye and start moving elsewhere. Um, Very sad, actually. Um, having to leave everything behind. Something you can never get off yourself, get off your chest. So, the chapter's argument. Um, the laments of Troy and Alba Longa, their sadness, their grief, losing a city, are connected into Rome's history and genes by linking Rome's fate to its predecessors. That's what I think. That Rome is essentially Troy, a second Troy, a second Alba Longa, just waiting to happen. Since Romans are the descendants of Trojans, it just feels, like fate, kind of. Um, so since Rome is no different to Troy, Rome is just like a Troy 2, the sequel, waiting to fall. And so, like I said before, Troy being the antitype. Um, this is from the chapter from the author, Keith. They said Troy being the antitype, it will lead to Rome's prosperity, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that um, I'm not agreeing. I agree with the thing of an antitype, but I don't agree that the fall of Rome and Troy. I mean, the fall of Troy and Alba Longa would lead to the rise of Rome. Um, the author points it out a little bit ways where like things will change, things will get better. But I just don't believe that, especially now at this time. History has shown us that eventually the Roman Empire did fall, but also way time, um, long time after, and so yeah, it's a little bit iffy, but kind of I just don't fully agree with the argument. But that's what I got out of it. That's what I got from the author, and that's what I put as myself as my own point. And so finally, the things to take from this, my conclusion. Troy's remains are a symbol of sorrow, grief. Um, but since the author treats it as the antitype, it leaves space for greater things to come in Rome. Um, so the intertextual connections and relationships in Greek literacy that can be traced to Latin Trojans. Um, so basically, since I've said this before plenty of times, Romans are descendants of Trojans. Not only are they like blood essentially, but also their um, connections between literacy, art, books, these epics, these poems, how these Romans take inspiration from Homer, which is um, way beyond their time. It just is interesting how you always look back to Homer, kinda. Um, and so there's always going to be a relationship, a connection between. And I say Greek literacy because that's how the author put it in there. It's not a copy of it, but I see a lot of Greek, even though it mostly says Roman and Rome. So excuse me. Um, so yeah, I mean there's connections between Rome and Trojans, not only in blood and genes, but there's also literacy, the way they wrote, the way they spoke, the way they explained stuff, the way they detailed grief, sorrow, the women. Um, Here, the women, going to my next point, the connections between city lament and gender lament. Um, I said before the contrast of male warfare and female lament, female grief. Um, I mentioned Euripides, and also in the chapter it mentions Euripides, and I did the Trojan women play, and so that was a lot of inspiration for me with the lament stuff. I wanted to connect it, but not that much because it wasn't the point of, um, you know, PowerPoint. Um, like the women play a crucial role. Women are always there. The women are never looked over. The women's lament, the women's grief, the women's embodiment of that grief, their sorrow, their sadness, how how they show themselves in the way that the authors depicted them, how they were written, um, and how they connected the city lament and the gender lament. The men went to war, died, didn't come back. The women grieved. Um, their city burned down, their homes gone, and so having to leave everything behind. It was a life or death situation. Finally, um, I think this one a very cool point in the chapter. Keith said Rome is the eternal city. It does, but I said that doesn't mean that it's safe from everything. As Rome eventually fell, but in the chapter, eternal city didn't mean it was forever. It didn't mean eternal. Um, it just meant 10 times longer, basically. It said, Troy was, let's say, 1 times as rich, as long, as powerful. Well, Rome's gonna be 10 times as rich, 10 times as long, 10 times as powerful. Um, and so that's my depiction of that. Rome is not eternal, but also said it's going to be part of the present, the past, present, and future. And so that was very important. Like, you notice this now. Like, yeah, Rome has always been there. Rome's history, um, genes, their bloodline, all relating all the way back to Troy and Homer. It's always going to be there. So the symbolism is there. and the ruins may be there, but there might not. But the ruins might always be there, but the symbolism will be. And so that's what I think about the eternal city of Rome. Um, you know, will forever symbolize something, but will may never be there. And so now, getting to the end of my discussion, well, to the start of the discussion of the PowerPoint, these are my discussion questions. Um, although all the evidence, points to Romans being Trojans and stuff like that, do you truly believe that, it's a repeat of what's going to happen? Rome is going to be a repeat of Troy, no matter what. Um, even though I said, Rome is an eternal city, it's 10 times as better as Troy, will it still have the same outcome? Did it still have the same outcome because, a fate of Troy, um, how it's depicted in these epics and poems. Rome is supposed to be so powerful and so great, but they never like they predict the future, but they never predict it fully. Where eventually the Roman Empire is gonna fall, well, the Western Roman Empire is gonna fall. And so, do you truly believe that this connection between Roman Romans and Trojans is really like fate basically binding them to like suffering, to failing? So that's my first point. You could obviously ignore what I just said and think for your own. And so my next three, what role did the women play? Women are always there, whatever, Homer story, Homer, the Aeneid, Virgil, Ovis, Enos, like they're always there. What role do they play? Why are they so important? And why do you think they're so crucial to these depictions? Um, something I've noticed is the progression. Usually we think, oh, this, the Iliad being an epic of war, being, going to fight a war for Helen of Troy. Well, sorry, Helen of Greece and then of Troy. Um, you think it's gonna be such a battle, but then you realize it's a lot more meaningful, a lot more deeper. So why is that? Why are the authors deciding to put the women in the spotlight and show their grief, show their sorrow, show how they feel, which is very surprising to me. Um, Technical difficulty, sorry. The headset turned off. So, question three. Why is, like I said before, why is it the feminine? Why are women so represented in this sorrow? Why is it never? Why is it not, a powerful woman, but a um a sad one who's grieving, one who's vulnerable, but doesn't let herself, be vulnerable. Um, if that makes sense. Um, she's grieving for her loss, like Hecuba, Andromeda. Um, sad because they lost people they loved, but also looking for the future. Um, you know, why during the sack of Troy and the Aeneid, the importance of women is um, very key. And so finally, the fourth question, by the poets, it is implied that the falls of Troy, um, sorry, the fall of Troy and others like it brought Roman reconstruction. And why do you think that is?